Hello everyone, welcome to GB Bricks. My name is Glenn. In today's video, we've got a review of a Pantasy set. This is the first ever non-Lego set I've ever built, and this is their Retro Phone set 85018. This comes via designer James May, who previously worked for Lego. He designed, amongst other things, their typewriter, so another retro object. And we'll have a look at exactly how this one stacks up. So what do I think of this retro phone? Well, thank you to Pantasy for the review copy, and now let me tell you. So for this review, I'm going to start with the overall aesthetic of the build first today, rather than the building experience or building techniques that I generally start with, and I'll explain why a bit later. So here we have the retro phone once built, and to be fair, it does look absolutely stunning. It has that ornate detail, a very elegant look to it, a very good use of gold colour with that dark brown. Really does allow for the detailing to stand out. Details themselves, such as the rotary system, allowing obviously for you to make phone calls back in the day. The handle, or the receiver I should say, sorry, looks great. Very good use of pieces there to get the shaping right. And it does a fantastic job, to be fair, of replicating or homaging the time period that it's going for. There are very few studs showing on the build, just a few really. There are a couple here that you may be able to see. Other than that, the vast majority of it is tiled off. If we have a look here, there are some functions that we will go through later on in the review. Here's the back, and again, just does such a good job of getting its colors right and just exuding that kind of ornate detailing. Let's just straighten up a bit. There we go. And then the final side, again, very similar. It is a lovely looking model, really does look quite fantastic. If we move on to the build experience now then, and unfortunately this is where it's going to lose some marks, because I can say quite comprehensively that this is one of the most frustrating builds that I have put together in a good while. Let me explain why. Well, basically, this part here of the model, as much as it doesn't look like it now that it's all finished, is very flimsy when building. There are a few reasons for that, a few different reasons, and I'll go through some of those now. First and foremost, when you initially start building the model, the base of it is very fragile. And until you get some heavy bricks on there later in the build, I'm talking a good 3/4 of the way through, that base is extremely flimsy and it does fall apart quite often. Secondly, whilst the clutch power of the bricks in general was very good, I wouldn't have been able to distinguish it really from Lego. The bricks themselves do look a bit different. They're quite shiny compared to Legos. Feel a bit lighter as well, but the clutch power felt quite similar. But there were a couple of exceptions. One of those was in cases where it was too strong. Generally when using anything like clips, you know, your general Technic pieces if you were using Lego, there were a couple of instances where the pieces just, I could not push them down. Now, I will say that I have torn a tendon in my shoulder and damaged my vertebrae. I did that a while ago now, about 8 months ago, but I am still suffering with the effects from it. So I don't have as much strength in my right side as I used to at this moment in time. And that could have contributed to this. But by the same token, I will say that one of my kind of rehabilitation exercises, if you like, has been building models. And I haven't had an issue like this in any of the others I've built so far. So yeah, building or pushing, sorry, those Technic kind of pins into bricks or through bricks at times was very, very difficult on this model. The other side of it was that a couple of the bricks, and I mean just literally a couple, but in quite key areas, well, the clutch power was almost non-existent. Now, I don't know, you won't be able to see this very well because obviously they're buried within the build now, but there were a couple of bricks here. They were your kind of standard studs on side bracket pieces that you'd find, and within here they kind of kept this piece in. So this here hides a lot of the mechanisms, a lot of the cogs that allow for the functions that we'll look at in a moment. And trying to keep all this in place was almost impossible. Every time I touched this fell off. The brackets weren't strong enough, they couldn't stay on, which caused the whole thing to collapse. Now, one of the functions on the front here, I would say the main function really, is the fact that obviously you can use it as a telephone, an old style telephone in which you would dial the numbers in the classic old way, and it's meant to ping back in place by use of elastic bands. Now, this worked perfectly when I first built it, and I was actually very impressed because it sprang back really nicely. It really gave that impression of a classic phone. Unfortunately, when I went to build this top part here, so I'd finished all of this by this point, when I went to build this part here and push it onto the model, the whole thing collapsed in my hand. The sides fell off, the front pieces of it broke off, these pieces, these here, which are, again, if I show on the back, it's probably easier, attached by clips and brackets, very flimsy until you're finished and not touching it anymore. It all fell off, the whole thing fell apart, and I had to rebuild it. And I can't, no matter what I do, get this function to work again. I went right back to this part. I rebuilt this 4 times. So I put the rest back together. I mean, that was an easy fix because obviously that's just bricks falling off. But I rebuilt this 4 times and can't get it to work. The best I can do, if I remove this clip here, which I'll show you now, and hopefully it won't be camera shy and it will work this time. If I then do the telephone function, I can get it to wind enough then that the elastic band will do its job, but it won't go back to where it should have gone. It should go back to there so you can see the numbers, which it was doing absolutely perfectly before that break. So I've seen it work, so I can confidently say it does work. I haven't got a clue what's gone wrong this time, but even after 4 attempts, I just couldn't get it to work again after that massive break, that massive collapse, and I'll be honest, I ran out of patience. So it's going to look there, and that's not going to be used as far as mine's concerned until I have the enthusiasm to try again and see what went wrong. Let's move on to the build techniques now then, and there are a few functions within this set. One of them I've already mentioned being the rotary dial, and as I said, it did work and it did look very impressive when it worked, but something has gone wrong there and I just cannot work it out. I've built it by the letter of the law in the instructions. It just won't work again, but there we go, c'est la vie. Aside from that, you have the fact that you have the ability to cut the phone off as you used to do when you were trying to get a dial in tone. That's quite a clever little mechanic there. You can turn this dial and that will allow for the phone at the bottom to move between the bells, allowing the phone to ring. And I do think that those features do add a lot of charm to this set and make it more than just a model standing on a shelf, provided they work, of course. Now, what I will say is, now obviously this was created by James May, who has worked for Lego in the past. He was behind another retro themed model in the typewriter, and he's clearly a very talented designer. I wonder, and I am speculating here, but I wonder if the procedures that are allowed by Lego, or more importantly not allowed, in terms of what they would deem an illegal technique, or not even necessarily illegal, but how strong something needs to be before it's allowed to pass through quality control. I wonder if other brick companies are quite as strict, because there were a few techniques where, as I mentioned, building it felt so flimsy and it was falling apart in my hands constantly. I mean, these parts I've mentioned already, so I won't go on about it, but I must have had to fix these 5, 6, 7, 8 times across the strength of the build. These were constantly falling off as well. It didn't lead to a very enjoyable build experience, and I do wonder if some of that is down to the parts. As I mentioned, the clutch power on some of these wasn't strong enough, but some is down to the techniques that are perhaps allowed by certain companies that wouldn't be allowed by others. Another smaller example of this would be when you're building the feet of the model, you put some pads on them. They're the only stickers, if you like, in the set. Everything else you see is printed, but these stickers act as friction to allow the set to sit nicely on a table, not do any damage to a surface, and keep the model in place. But you have to push them onto the anti-studs of the feet, which is something I've never seen before. And it's just a small example of what I mean, that perhaps there are methods that are allowed that, no matter how talented the designer, if you're using certain methods that aren't being nixed for being not as strong as they should be, perhaps you're always going to have slight issues. Now, this is the first model I've ever built that isn't a Lego model set, so I can't prove that, for want of a better word, but this is the first, as I just said, and it's the first one really that I've had major problems with in a long time in terms of stability. Next, we move on to what I usually use for minifigures, or if there aren't any in such a set, then for budget. How have the company used their budget to its fullest within this set? Now, A lot of that in this set will come down to those prints. As you can see, there are a number of ornate detailings all across the set here, and they do look fantastic. This again is all printed. The only stickers, if you like, in the set were those friction pieces for the feet. Everything else is a print. So obviously they have used their budget very well. Something else I saw in this set that I've never seen before is that these pieces here, so there are two different curved pieces there for each one of these. They actually came attached to another brick, one, or plate I should say, one that you don't actually use for the build, being this one here. So you've got 4 of these in the set that aren't actually needed. They were used purely to attach these two so that these were together when you came to need them, and this is shown in the instructions. Quite an interesting use of budget there to include pieces that you don't actually need, just to keep pieces together. I thought that was very commendable. It's a nice way of helping the consumer and the builder have as little stress as possible in terms of finding certain pieces. So fair play to them for that. And I will say, to be fair, that this is certainly used its budget very well. Let's move on to value then, and unfortunately I could only find one price for this set, being the US price, which is $69.99. If I've managed to find any other prices, they will be at the bottom of your screen. Now, in terms of the model that you're getting for that, it's of a decent size. Once built, it stands at approximately 25 centimeters. It's definitely got some weight to it. And as we've covered already, the ornate detailing, the printed pieces, they definitely come into this section and do offer good value for money. Now, you may need to factor in things such as shipping depending on where you live in the world. So that's something else that you'd kind of need to consider externally from this review. And a couple of other things I need to mention in this section is there was a mistake in the instructions on one part. There were a couple of bricks that you should have put down that weren't shown in the pictures, and it was only when you got to the next step that they were there. And you need to be quite eagle-eyed to spot that and put them in. And secondly, there were a couple of pieces in my set missing, being these just here. And that's kind of just showing what I was talking about. That bracket has fallen off again as I was trying to turn it round. It's this here, this bracket. These brackets are just not strong enough. Compared to the rest of the bricks, these seem to be have a bit of a design flaw in them because they're not strong enough as far as I'm concerned. But what I was trying to show you was the couple of bricks that are missing here. So there's one 1x2 dark brown jumper plate missing, and one of the silver 1x1 studded tiles, or rounded tiles, sorry. So yeah, they were missing from my set, so that's unfortunate, and I will have to factor that into the value section, of course. To conclude, the Pantasy Retro Phone set 85018 is one of those models where, for me, the overall design and the finished article are certainly very impressive, and if that's the main thing for you when you are building a model, you're going to be absolutely delighted with this. For me though, it has to be about the experience whilst building, and that's where this model falls down. My experience with it wasn't a particularly positive one. Towards the end, I was starting to get quite frustrated with the amount of times it kept breaking. Certain bricks are just not strong enough in terms of their clutch power. They feel overworked in terms of what's being asked for them in the set. And the fact that a part of it that worked perfectly fine, once it fell apart once again and had to be rebuilt now, doesn't work. Probably my fault. I'm sure I'm missing something, despite the fact I've checked so many times and cannot see what I'm doing wrong this time. It's just not good for the overall memory you have once the set is finished. That being said, if once it is finished and any stress that you felt doing it evaporates for you, you're going to be absolutely getting your money's worth, I'm sure, depending on what shipping prices are like, of course. But for me, I need a bit more in my builds. I need to feel that they were worthwhile of my time and that they relaxed me. This is meant to be fun and stress-free as far as I'm concerned, and I didn't find that part of the experience here for me. The Pantasy Retro Phone gets a GB Bricks score of 71%. So there we have it then, there's my review of the Retro Phone from Pantasy. A lovely looking set, as I said, just wasn't as enjoyable a build for me as I need it to be. I need the whole experience. But yeah, definitely one that will look lovely on a shelf for sure. Let me know what you think of this, stick it all in the comment section below. And have you bought any alternative brick brands and what did you think of them? Please let me know any that you would recommend. Stick it all in the comment section below. Take care, and until next time, happy building.